for more is the author of the forthcoming book, Profligate Colonial, published by Cornell University Press. Joining us live from the University of California, Berkeley in San Francisco, Associate Professor at the Department of Southeast Asian Studies, Lisandro Leloy Claudio. So good to see you, Leloy. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Kathy. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So what does a narrowing trade deficit in the Philippines mean then, at a time of raging tariff wars among the Philippines' biggest trading partners?
Well, actually, when you zoom out, I don't think it really matters because we are not really in the crosshairs of the Trump administration. Never were. If you look at the Trump administration's Dirty 15, the economies it accuses of exporting more to it than it is importing, we've never been part of that. And in fact, our neighbors are really at the crosshair. So Trump has already gone after, of course, Canada, its immediate neighbors, the US's immediate neighbors, Canada and Mexico, and it's obviously gone after China. And it has a huge trade deficit with Vietnam. So Vietnam is likely the next target here if there is going to be a target for reciprocal tariffs in Southeast Asia.
But really, it's reciprocal tariffs. That's what the markets are afraid of. I mean, we're all exposed in some form or fashion. In all the countries that you mentioned, we do have trading relations with them. So we're not really that insulated, if you will.
We are not, and of course, there's an element of caprice in the Trump administration. How, for example, are they going to compute reciprocal trade tariffs? Are they only going to look at, for example, the tariffs that the Philippines imposes on the US? Or are they going to look at other things like the 12% VAT? Because technically, the 12% VAT also applies to US imports. And if it looks unkindly at that VAT, then we could probably be within the crosshairs of the Trump administration. But we're never sure, and we'll see what happens on the 2nd of April, which Trump has called a kind of a liberation day for the US economy.
I know, but let's pick on exports, for instance. Philippine export products that would have higher U.S. import tariff rates under the proposed reciprocal tariffs on April 2nd. What would they be, and what sort of an impact could that have then?
Well, we're not entirely sure what the reciprocal tariffs will be like if they're going to compute again the 12% VAT, and we're also not sure about which industries are going to be targeted. Of course, we send a lot of electronics to the United States, but this is, of course, low-level electronics. And of course, there are other factors at play here. For instance, the Philippines is a beneficiary of the CHIPS Act, meaning the U.S. wants to divert the production of semiconductors to friendly allies. So this is called friend sourcing. We don't know, for example, if that can offset the incentives in the CHIPS Act can offset any detriments that reciprocal tariffs can create. But I do want to mention one thing, Kathy. It's interesting because tariffs, of course, make things very expensive for U.S. companies. And of course, they're going to want to cut costs. And one way to cut costs is further outsourcing. And we, of course, know that further outsourcing usually in the United States benefits the Philippines.
And that takes us to the business process outsourcing industry. What impact then would that have?
Well, I think it's important to note. I mean, this is an obvious point, but people need to be reminded that the primary thing that we sell to the U.S. is our services and not our goods. And our services they're not involved in a system of tariffs. So as a result, we can make money from the U.S. We can sell things to the U.S. without incurring a lot of these tariffs. And I think that's the most important thing about our trade relationship now, or economic relationship now with the United States.
Well, I guess it would have been feasible if we had that free trade agreement. We've been trying to have it with the U.S., but now we don't. But if we did have it and entered into a free trade agreement, what would that do?
I'd like to answer this as a historian. We have had historically free trade agreements with the United States negotiated by Presidents Quezon, Osmeña, and of course Rojas. But of course, those free trade agreements, most of them are gone now, except for reciprocal free trade, except for reciprocal quotas. Most of them disappeared in the 1970s during the Marcos administration. Since then, it's been difficult to have a free trade agreement with the United States because of barriers domestically. We have a lot of nationalist provisions in our constitution, which has made historically the United States wary of establishing free trade agreements with us. I think the most important thing to note now is that the appetite for free trade in the United States has gone significantly down since the first administration. So the United States has pulled away from what has been called the neoliberal free trade order. And this is largely a bipartisan consensus. I know that there's some optimism on the part of Ambassador Romualdez that maybe a new free trade agreement or new exceptions can be hatched for the Philippines. I am not as optimistic as he is because in 2016 it was still possible under a Trump administration that was less mercantilist than it is now to have that.
All right, before we go, let's speak of remittances. What are you hearing on ground there from Filipino Americans on the zero remittance protest tactic? Because 40% of the cash remittances to the Philippines last year came from the U.S., the biggest among all the countries and jurisdictions.
Well, Kathy, I'm hearing news that 20 minutes away from where I live in Berkeley, so in San Francisco, there is supposed to be a rally for the former president. But I'm not sure if the tactic here is going to be to withhold remittances, similar to what's being called for in Europe and, if I'm not mistaken, the Middle East. In any case, I've been hearing reports that what some of them are going to do is they're just not going to remit during the period of, I think, late March to early April, and then they'll start remitting again. And so a lot of the money is just being withheld. And if that's the case, it's not going to do much, if it was ever going to do anything to begin with.
All right, lots to talk about from remittances to tariffs. Thank you so much, Professor Leloy Claudio at UC Berkeley in California.